You're floating in open water, lake or sea, far enough from shore that you can't quite touch the bottom anymore. Everything is calm. The sun is out. There is, by any reasonable measure, no actual danger anywhere near you. And then, without any warning at all, a single thought arrives uninvited. Something could be right underneath you, right now, and you would have absolutely no way of knowing until it was already too late. Your entire body reacts before your rational mind even finishes the sentence. A small jolt of cold panic, legs pulling upward instinctively, eyes scanning water that offers no visibility past a few feet in any direction. Nothing changed. No fin appeared. No shadow moved. And yet some old, extremely convincing part of you is now absolutely certain you need to get back to shore immediately. That feeling has a name research now takes seriously. Thalassophobia, the fear of deep or open water, and it turns out to be one of the most common, most instinctive fears human beings carry. Stranger still, it may be one of the only major fears we still haven't fully earned the right to switch off, even now. What follows will walk through exactly why your body still treats calm, harmless, open water as a genuine emergency. And why that reaction is considerably older and considerably better justified than most people ever stop to consider. You float in a calm lake on a warm afternoon, surrounded by lifeguards, buoys, and other swimmers within easy shouting distance, and your body still quietly prepares to bolt for shore over nothing more than an unwelcome thought. They stood at the edge of a tide pool, with nothing but their own eyes in each other, watched an unclear shape cut through open water, and retreated immediately without a shred of embarrassment about it. You have satellite weather forecasts, engine-powered boats, and rescue services a phone call away, and the fear still arrives exactly on schedule. Regardless, they had none of that, and treated the same fear as simple, obvious common sense. Not some irrational overreaction to be pushed past. The ocean itself hasn't gotten any more honest about what's moving beneath its surface at any given moment than it was 160,000 years ago. What's changed almost entirely is your side of the relationship. More tools, more confidence, more reasons to assume the old caution no longer applies to you personally. The water underneath you was never actually the thing keeping your ancestors alive long enough to have you. Their willingness to respect what they genuinely couldn't see was that single distinction. Respecting the unknown rather than pretending it isn't there, traveled quietly through every single generation between that tide pool and the moment you climbed into the water today, whether you were ever consciously aware of carrying it or not. This has been Stories from the Foxholes. The next time the bottom disappears beneath your feet, you'll know exactly which ancient edge dweller is still quietly steering you back to shore. Start with the basic biology, because it explains more than most people expect. Humans have no natural buoyancy control worth mentioning. No gills, no ability to extract oxygen from water under any circumstances, and a breath hold capacity that, even in trained specialists, measures in minutes rather than the hours some marine mammals manage without effort. Drowning can happen in a matter of minutes, in water barely over your head, if panic or exhaustion sets in at the wrong moment. Every one of our close evolutionary relatives among the great apes shows the exact same basic pattern. Comfortable near water, capable of wading and even swimming with practice, but never remotely adapted to a fully aquatic existence the way a seal or a dolphin is. On land, humans are unusually capable generalists, able to walk for miles, track prey for hours, and adapt to nearly any climate on Earth. In deep water, all of that hard-won competence disappears almost entirely, replaced by a body that is, at best, a reasonably good temporary visitor to an environment it was never actually designed for. Every ancestor who treated that gap with real seriousness, rather than casual confidence, was considerably more likely to still be alive to pass that caution on to you. Modern drowning statistics, even with lifeguards, flotation devices, and swimming lessons widely available, still consistently rank among the leading causes of accidental death worldwide. A sobering reminder that the physical mismatch between human bodies and open water was never fully solved by technology, only managed carefully by people who respected it. That mismatch has never really closed, no matter how advanced the surrounding safety equipment has become. It's simply been buffered, layer by tools your ancestors never had access to at all. Archaeologists have found some of the clearest evidence for how early humans actually related to the ocean at a site called Pinnacle Point on the southern coast of South Africa, where researchers uncovered evidence of deliberate, sustained shellfish harvesting dating back roughly 164,000 years. Among the earliest confirmed evidence anywhere of humans systematically exploiting marine resources for food. The pattern that evidence reveals is remarkably consistent, and it tells you almost everything about the actual relationship early humans had with the sea. These weren't deep-water fishers venturing out in boats. They were edge-dwellers, working the tidal zone at low tide, gathering shellfish, crabs, and stranded fish within careful reach of solid ground the entire time, retreating well before the tide turned dangerous again. The ocean, in this relationship, functioned as a reliable, generous pantry, but strictly one you visited at its edge, on its terms, and only when it was calm enough and shallow enough to read clearly. Nothing about this pattern suggests casual comfort with open or deep water. It suggests a species that had already learned, through hard experience, passed down over countless generations, exactly how far it could safely go, and exactly where that safety reliably ended. Similar coastal shell-midden sites have since been found scattered along ancient shorelines on multiple continents, each one telling essentially the same story independently. The shoreline as pantry, the open water beyond it as something else entirely, approached only rarely, and only with good reason. Researchers piecing together these sites across different regions have found remarkably little evidence of deliberate deep-water fishing technology anywhere near this early in the archaeological record, reinforcing just how consistently these early coastal populations chose the safety of the shallows over the uncertain rewards of anything further out. Here's the psychological piece that ties the biology to the behavior. On land, even in genuine darkness, human senses can usually pick up some information. Sound carries clearly, faint light often reaches further than you'd expect, and smell can warn you of danger from a real distance. In open or deep water, nearly all of that sensory advantage disappears at once. Visibility routinely drops to a few feet or less within a short distance below the surface. Sound behaves in strange, disorienting ways underwater, and there is no equivalent of catching a scent on the wind to warn you early. Researchers studying this specific fear have found that the vastness and absence of any visible boundary is doing much of the psychological work here. A threat you can't see, in a space with no edges and no reliable way to judge distance or depth, triggers the exact same oversensitive, better safe than sorry alarm system that fires in response to darkness on land. Except now it's operating in an environment where your body has almost no ability to actually respond effectively if the alarm turns out to be correct. On land, if the fear is right, you can usually run, climb, or fight. In open water, all three of those options become dramatically less available, all at the exact same time your senses are already failing you the most. Some researchers studying anxiety responses have noted that this particular combination, reduced sensory information paired with reduced physical options, is close to a worst-case scenario for the human threat detection system, which may explain why ocean-related fear so often feels disproportionately intense compared to statistically more dangerous everyday activities like driving a car, where your senses stay fully intact and your ability to react remains largely under your own control. A car crash, however dangerous statistically, at least happens in an environment your senses were built to interpret. Open water, by contrast, strips away nearly every tool your brain would normally use to judge whether a given moment is actually safe. None of this means humans never found a way past this fear. It means that when we finally did, it took an extraordinary amount of technology, accumulated knowledge, and carefully managed risk to get there. Austronesian voyagers, beginning roughly 3,000 years ago and continuing for centuries afterward, undertook some of the most remarkable ocean crossings in human history. Navigating vast stretches of open Pacific Ocean in double-hulled canoes, using nothing but the stars, wave patterns, and the behavior of birds in clouds to find islands sometimes thousands of miles apart, with no instruments of any kind to confirm they were on course. This wasn't casual confidence either. Voyaging traditions in this culture were wrapped in extensive ritual, careful seasonal timing, and rigorous training passed down across generations of dedicated navigators. Precisely because the risk of the open ocean was taken so seriously that success depended on treating every single crossing as a genuinely dangerous undertaking, requiring real expertise, not a routine trip. These voyagers didn't lose the fear. They built an entire body of specialized knowledge specifically to manage it responsibly, which is arguably an even stronger form of respect for the ocean's danger than simple avoidance ever was. Master navigators trained for decades before being trusted to lead a crossing alone, memorizing star paths, swell patterns, and the subtle color changes in water that signaled an approaching island long before it was visible. A body of knowledge so precise that modern researchers who've studied it describe it as a genuinely sophisticated navigational science, developed entirely without writing, instruments, or any of the tools a modern sailor would consider essential. Losing a master navigator in some of these voyaging cultures was treated as a genuine catastrophe, on the scale of losing an entire library, because so much of what made a safe crossing possible existed only inside one carefully trained person's memory. Picture the scene at the tide pools. 100-some thousand years ago, an ordinary low-tide morning like countless others before it. Tallow and a few others from the band are moving carefully along the rocks, prying shellfish loose, checking the shallow pools for anything the retreating tide left behind. The water out past the rocks is still deep enough to hide its own floor, deep enough that nobody in the group has ever actually seen what lives down there in any detail. Someone spots it first. A shape, dark, moving with clear purpose, cutting a visible line through the water some distance offshore. Gone beneath the surface again, before anyone can get a second, clearer look. Nobody debates whether to investigate further. There's no discussion, no vote, no argument about whether it might have been harmless. The entire group moves back from the water's edge immediately, without a single word needing to be spoken, gathering the shellfish they've already collected and putting solid rock and distance between themselves and the open water until the shape, whatever it actually was, has had more than enough time to move on. They never find out what it was. They don't need to. The uncertainty itself was the entire signal, and every single person in that group already understood, without being taught it directly, that the correct response to an unclear shape in deep water was never curiosity. It was distance, immediately, and without debate. That evening, back at camp, someone will mention it briefly around the fire, more as a passing fact than a dramatic story. Something moved out past the rocks today. Best to check the deeper pools less often for a while. No panic, no lasting fear response beyond that point. Just a small, practical adjustment, folded quietly into tomorrow's plan. The same way you might mention a pothole to someone about to drive the same road. Here's the turn. Modern technology has made the ocean dramatically safer and more accessible than it has ever been in human history. Boats with reliable engines, life jackets, sonar, satellite rescue beacons, entire industries built around recreational diving and open water swimming, and yet thalassophobia remains one of the most commonly reported specific fears in the modern world, showing up reliably in surveys. Driving enormous online engagement with deep-sea imagery and shipwreck footage, and quietly convincing plenty of confident swimmers to keep their feet moving a little faster on the way back to shore once the bottom disappears from view. The equipment changed completely. The underlying alarm didn't update even slightly to match it. Your ancient sense of the ocean isn't measuring today's actual statistical risk. which for most recreational swimmers in managed waters is genuinely very low. It's still measuring the same thing it always measured. How much of this environment can I actually see, and how much of it can I actually control if something goes wrong? On both counts, even with all of today's technology sitting on the shore behind you, the honest answer hasn't changed nearly as much as the equipment has. Marine biologists studying attention and vigilance in recreational swimmers have found that even experienced open water athletes report brief, involuntary spikes of unease when visibility drops or the seafloor disappears from view, regardless of how many times they've made the exact same swim safely before, suggesting the response isn't really about personal experience or confidence level at all, but about something considerably older that experience alone was never going to fully override. You float in a calm lake on a warm afternoon, surrounded by lifeguards, buoys, and other swimmers within easy shouting distance, and your body still quietly prepares to bolt for shore over nothing more than an unwelcome thought. They stood at the edge of a tide pool, with nothing but their own eyes in each other, watched an unclear shape cut through open water, and retreated immediately without a shred of embarrassment about it. You have satellite weather forecasts, engine-powered boats, and rescue services a phone call away, and the fear still arrives exactly on schedule. Regardless, they had none of that, and treated the same fear as simple, obvious common sense. Not some irrational overreaction to be pushed past. The ocean itself hasn't gotten any more honest about what's moving beneath its surface at any given moment than it was 160,000 years ago. What's changed almost entirely is your side of the relationship. More tools, more confidence, more reasons to assume the old caution no longer applies to you personally. The water underneath you was never actually the thing keeping your ancestors alive long enough to have you. Their willingness to respect what they genuinely couldn't see was that single distinction. Respecting the unknown rather than pretending it isn't there, traveled quietly through every single generation between that tide pool and the moment you climbed into the water today, whether you were ever consciously aware of carrying it or not. This has been Stories from the Foxholes. The next time the bottom disappears beneath your feet, you'll know exactly which ancient edge dweller is still quietly steering you back to shore.